I'm Sasha Nicole.
And I'm Star.
And I'm Dr. T.
And this is Amerikan Therapy, the definitive podcast on all things mental health, Black mental health, that is. And we are back. Stars with the red cup. And she's going to tell y'all what we're talking about today. It's actually a very exciting show.
Woo, woo, woo. So in my cup, I'm actually drinking water, which is unusual. No, I'm joking. So today we're going to talk about, have you ever been in an argument or a discussion with someone and they're like, oh, well, 65% of Black people don't pay taxes or something crazy, right? We all do it. I sometimes do it too because people don't follow back up and look at stats. But we're going to talk about bad stats today.
Absolutely. So we have our esteemed guest, Ivory A. Toldson, who is the president and CEO of the QEM Network, professor of counseling psychology at Howard University, and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education. Previously, Toldson was appointed by President Barack Obama to devise national strategies to sustain and expand federal support to HBCUs. As executive director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs, he also served as a senior research analyst for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and contributing education editor for The Root, where he has debunked some of the most pervasive myths about the African Americans in the Show Me the Numbers column. So this is really important because, as you've seen throughout this experience that we're going through, not only with the pandemic, but just in general with the civil unrest, you have a lot of people who are talking about the Black on Black crime, a lot of people who are saying that there's not a lot of Black men who exist, and all of these other stats and myths that that people say, but may not necessarily be true. So we're happy to have you, Ivory, to help us debunk some of these myths that we see all the time, every day.
Yeah.
And that not only our own people think, but our white counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So if you could tell us, first just, about your book, Bad Stats, and, the importance of it.
Okay. Yeah, well, I first want to thank you all for having me on the show. I read a little bit about the background of the show and really love and appreciate the concept. Because I have a mental health background myself. I'm in the counseling psychology program at Howard University, and kind of my introduction to negative statistics was through being a psychologist at the federal penitentiary, where I was in a situation where I was working with a lot of Black males and who are dealing with psychological trauma. Which contributed to the behaviors that led to them being in the criminal justice system. But I quickly had to reconcile my experience with the numbers. And one of the things that I talk about in No BS is that behind every number, there's a person. And a lot of times when we use statistics and numbers without coordinating or considering the person underneath that, we end up using the numbers for oppressive purposes. And so that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because a lot of the research that I was doing where I was trying to bring more context to the statistics that people were seeing, I found that them being so susceptible to BS was interfering with their ability to really see the humans behind the numbers, which was causing a lot of Black children not to get the kind of care and compassion that they need in order to thrive in the educational settings and even the mental health settings.
So we're gonna put you on the spot a little bit, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what is some of the top bad stats that you've heard recently, especially around mental health and also around racial injustice, around the whole Black on Black crime myth? Right. I won't say theory, myth.
Yeah. Well, one of the top ones and probably the one that got the most attention was the statistic that there are more Black men in prison than college. And so that was one of the first ones that I debunked. And, that's something I used to hear so often. I even said it myself because I just thought it was true because so many people were saying it. And then it was around 2012, I started working with a documentary filmmaker named James Morton, and he was in film, not academia. And he challenged me. He said, I hear a lot of academics like you, spouting off these statistics, but when I pull data from the National Center for Educational Statistics and Department of Justice, I'm seeing one thing, and I get around y'all scholars, and you all are still spouting the stuff that I don't think is true, and nobody's listening to me because I don't have a PhD behind my name. And so he said, you seem like you have more sense than some of the scholars. And so he just challenged me to just really look at it. And so I did, and I found it was correct, that it was more black men in college. And I could talk more about that, but some of the others, there's a lot that's said about the contributions of single parents to children not doing well in school. A lot of yes around that. There's a lot said about criminality in general, and there's this notion that each generation is more violent or more prone to crime than the previous generation. So there's a lot of BS embedded in that. There's also a lot of BS associated with things like reading scores and the way that people use a NAEP exam. So that black people don't read. There's BS associated with this acting white theory.
Now hold up now, black people, when you say black people don't read now, because now I'm not part of the statistic, I read a book a week, but right. I don't know too many black people who read books. No, I'm joking. Dr. Rice is giving me the evil eye, like, shut up.
Well, and I mean, everybody have their own subjective interpretation, but the way that and I know you were just joking, but a lot of people feel the way that you do. And, one thing, and with this being a mental health show, you all know about cognitive schemas and how, and you all also know about confirmation biases.
What is that? Hold up, cognitive who?
So cognitive schemas is our tendency to fill in information gaps with our preconceived notions. I don't have a lot of background information about you all. And so what I do naturally is I use different pretty superficial cues that's informed by my perceptions and my experiences, and I fill in those information gaps until I, learn whether or not it's confirmed or contrary to that.
So is what you're saying, like, you basically make a preconceived judgment about a person and maybe how they look, how they act? Is mm-hmm. that a good way to characterize the term that you're using, Dr. T?
Yes, yeah, and that's used against Black people all the time.
Yeah, I would say, like, you fill in the blanks of a story without mm-hmm. actually reading the book. So right. as Dr. Toldson said, we all do it all the time, but for Black people, the story that's told, like in the media, in the press, in academia, the mm-hmm. story that's told is so negative that when people fill in the blanks, it's very difficult to overcome that. And then exactly. people don't oftentimes replace the blanks when they get new information. Mm-hmm. They just kind of keep going automatically right. with the story that they've already had running in their minds.
So this would be a good example of when, let's say, the news will post a Black man who may have been murdered by police with a picture of him with, with the skull cap on or something like that to create mm-hmm. the narrative right. That he's a quote unquote thug, rather mm-hmm. than maybe the picture of him graduating from Harvard or something.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and you all know the subtitle of my book, right?
No, tell us.
The subtitle is Black People Need People Who Believe in Black People Enough Not to Believe Every Bad Thing They Hear About Black People. That's the subtitle. It's all on the cover. It fits on the cover. Now, the reason why it's titled that is because when I would go to debunk a lot of these myths, people was so, like when I was telling people, 700,000 more Black men in college than prison, you would expect people who believed in black people to be like, oh yeah, that's what's up, you know, like, oh great, you know, because I always knew that black men, you know, they had it in it, you know, black men doing that thing. Like, that's what you would expect someone to say if they believed in them. But I was getting the most conscious pro-black activists ever saying, you know, what you mean, brother? You know, what you mean? You know, we know that there are more black men in prison than in college. We know about the school to prison pipeline and the prison industrial complex, and you know, all of these things are true. I'm not negating that we do have something called the school to prison pipeline. There is a prison industrial complex, and I know that better than most people because I've walked in the factories of Unicor behind the walls of the federal prison system, so I know it exists. I know about conspiracy, possession with intent to distribute crack cocaine that was giving brothers 25 years to life that had never killed anybody. I know all the injustices, but trying to make something negative about black people true when it's not is not going to help us fight those injustices.
But do you see though, Dr. Ivory, or I won't call you Ivory because I have a cousin named Ivory. But like, do you see like where there's like a cottage industry, even with black intellectuals? And I think what you're talking about is like our hoteps, you know, like, because I mean, I love me some YouTube and I'll be like, you know what, these white people are trying to kill us. If you watch YouTube for 15, 30 minutes, you'll like fight the power, white people are trying to kill us. This whole system needs to be torn apart. So like, they're like black intellectuals, and I use air quotes too when I say black intellectuals. It almost seems like many of those people that consider black intellectuals are degreed through, I'm going to the Hotep side, degreed through the master's system. That's what a master's degree is if you watch YouTube, right? So it's almost like black people, you know, like there's a benefit to espousing the negatives of blackness for black people.
Yeah, and that's true. And you know, if you think about a grant proposal, when you're trying to get the resources to correct the problem, there is a problem statement that you have to produce, and the problems are there. But when you find this easy and compelling, quick stat to express the problem, even though the problem is more nuanced than that. You know, and you know, one thing we have to be respectful enough to black people and the black experience not to try to dumb down our issues. But when someone gets this easy soundbite, a lot of times they use that, and you know, for the purposes that you just mentioned, they're trying to do more selling of the problem than finding solutions. But you know, the real problem comes in when we sell the wrong problem, we get resources to correct a myth, and we end up not doing what we need to do for the people who we claim that we care about. A good example of that is all the resources that's put into dropout prevention programs, and there's no resources that's put into college promotion. You know, so you know, a lot of times when you see, you know, college promotion, you're seeing a church group that's operating on very few resources, trying to get a bus together, taking students on the HBCU tour. These are things that the children need, but the government is spending more on things like prison abatement and dropout prevention and all these types of things because of these sensational sound bites that we're sold.
Dr. Royster, can you talk about like, because I find in a policy space that there's racialized data on the negatives, but or on certain aspects, but like when you try to look at racialized data in the healthcare space, that's a whole new arena. Like you find out, oh, we don't capture by race. It's like, what? So we dying and you don't capture by race?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say too, because I mean, it's true. First of all, let's just start there. It's true. We're all susceptible, and it's much easier, I guess I don't know, I'll put easier in air quotes. It's much easier for people to focus on a deficit than for people to think about building a strength. And so according to, very similar to what Dr. Toldson said, if we say these are things that we know help Black people do better, it's harder to sell that. to the funders, to the this. So if we say these are the negative things, and
who
we're going
happen to be white most of the time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so then that kind of reinforces for ourselves as Black people who are trying to do better that we need to find all the negatives, we need to find all the deficits, we need to identify all the problems, when we know in our field that building on strengths gets you much further than trying to correct a deficit. But the system doesn't support our ability to do that in an easy way. It's much, much harder. And you can write a grant proposal that's building on strengths and you're going to get scores, and then they're going to say, well, it just didn't hold up to other proposals, or it was a great idea, but because people aren't used to seeing someone try to build up, they're very much used to a deficit model.
Yeah, and you know, there's something that I say in the book, and I want to repeat here. When it comes to problems with Black people, like any situation that Black people are going through that we need to correct, I say check racism first. Check racism first, right? You gotta rule out racism before you try to deal with any issue that we might have. And you know, and you know, I've said that to a group of white people. They ask me, you know, why can't we find Black teachers? You know, like we need to try to, you know, recruit more Black teachers, make sure they're doing well in school. You know, a lot of them are interested in teaching. And you know, I say, well, check racism first. Ask your human resources department why they're not hiring Black people first. When you can tell me that there are no biases in your hiring practices, I will investigate why you're not getting more Black teachers from our side. So, you know, going back to what Dr. T was saying, you know, we are taught by mostly white people that we need to look for problems within ourselves, and they don't want the spotlight on them. And a lot of times when they're asking us to correct something, they're trying to make us fix our communities. They're trying to make us fix our schools and all that kind of stuff, when really we need the resources to fight against them first. because they're the problem. You know, like, we can't fix Black poverty as long as you're being racist in your hiring practices.
One of the most favorite things that I've read recently, people keep saying the system is broken, the system is broken. And the truth is the system is working exactly the way it was designed to work. It's not broken at all. So in order for us to change the system, we can't fix it. It was designed to oppress. It was designed to keep and limit our potential and growth, to limit opportunities. So the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And so if we keep trying to tinker with the current system, we're never going to get different results. And I think the statistics really feed into that because they're designed to kind of answer the questions that the system already knows the answer to.
Right.
So, Dr. Ivory, like, what should we be asking for? Like, what stats do we need to start collecting? Because we know that in spaces where racialized data may be helpful to show, to like illustrate systemic racism, like that data is often, especially at a state and local level, is often just missing. So what key data points, if we're like, okay, we need this racialized or whatever type of data that could help support, you know, Black people and Black people's agenda or benefit?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So in my book, first chapter, I talk about 3 aspects of good data. And the first is, it's got to be comprehensive data. So these quick sound bites, we need data that we can look at longitudinally. We need data that's subject to multiple perspectives, not just one. We need data that's absent an agenda, that just really helps us to see, bottom line, where the issues are. The second thing is we have to have a thoughtful analysis. So stuff like the achievement gap, that's not a thoughtful analysis. If all you're doing is taking one group of people and comparing it to another group of people and looking at some gap in between them, and you're neglecting all of the other factors, you know, because if you have a Black student that comes from an impoverished background, they're living in a less than optimal situation. They're walking a good distance to school. They have to negotiate with a lot of players on their way to school. They have to, convince the drug dealers that, that they're not the ones cut out for that game, that they have a different vision. You have Black kids doing this every single day, and they're doing it with sophistication, and they're in school and they have B's or C's in school. We shouldn't look at the gap between them and someone that has every single resource that's still making B's. They are superior to that person, not the same. So thoughtful analysis looks within the group, it looks at relative strengths, and it connects data to other data points. It's not just looking at the singular rigid data point. And then the final thing is a compassionate understanding. That's where data humanism comes into place. When we care about something, we look beyond the numbers. It's kind of like if, any of us who owns a house, if you love that house and somebody comes in and gives you an appraisal, and so they give you this numeric value of your house that's based on just numbers like square footage, how many bathrooms you have, the price of the sale of other houses around you, like that got anything to do with you, but that's going in your appraisal. But you love this house. You put your heart into this house. You painted the walls, you redid the floors. You know this house on a different level than that appraisal. People have to do the same thing for Black children. We have to care enough about them. We have to have enough compassion that when we get a low appraisal on them, we know how to give it the kind of nuance and context that's going to help people see beyond just a number.
So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Toldson, is that I've often thought about that Black people are perhaps doing better than what we're told we're doing. Mm-hmm. And, and in just hearing the conversation and knowing that your book has been based on debunking a lot of the myths, like you hear a lot of Black women say, there aren't any good Black men, they're all in prison. I mean, I hear that all the time. Yeah. And I, and I often wonder, because when I think about the pipeline, I'm like, well, dang, maybe that's true. Or you hear the myth of, and well, most Black men now, if they're not in prison, then they're gay. So many different things that we can think of. And so it's like when I'm listening to the conversation, it's like for me, and again, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing that we are not looking at the appropriate data to recognize or realize that we may actually be on a trajectory upward than what we're told or perceived to be, and that we're actually being fed negative data as a means to keep us in a baseline of thinking that that's where we are. Am I being clear?
You are being clear, absolutely, and you're on point. And I try to be careful about telling people things are better or worse, because the truth is there's a lot that Black people need in our society in order for us to advance. Mm-hmm. It's just a narrative that's very dangerous, is that somehow we contribute to our own demise. And so it takes the attention off of the oppressive elements in this society, and it focuses on us. But numbers are used as a weapon against us. The issue with relationships, where a lot of educated Black women feel like their education is competing with their ability to find a man. Now, statistically, you increase your odds by getting educated, statistically, of getting married. So if marriage is the objective, Black women who have college degrees on average are more likely to be married than a Black woman who has dropped out of high school or dropped out of college. It's a direct linear path. The more education you have on from high school dropout to PhD, the greater your odds are of being married. Now that goes against the narrative, And there are educated Black women out there who struggle with finding someone that suits them. And I will never say that your reality isn't what it is because of numbers. You know, I will say that you can't use statistics to support your difficulties, but I'll never say that you're not having difficulties because everybody has their own unique experience.
And sometimes those difficulties are self-inflicted.
It might be, but I'll stay out of that. That's not my place.
That's another show.
That's not my place.
Well,
my only place is to tell you is that the statistics doesn't support your experience.
Hold on, Ivory. Are you married to a beautiful Black queen?
I am.
Okay, now, because you know he's going to be like,
you want me to she's around here somewhere?
Proof is in the pudding. But I think, Sasha, one of the things you're pointing out is that when we hear a bad statistic so much, it gives us a pessimistic approach to how we go to solve our own issues, our own problems. So, you know, then, I mean, we all have Black female friends who are looking for men, and their approach is, they're approaching it with the expectation that they're not going to find anything of quality. Because that's what they have, that's the schema they have adopted.
Right.
Boy, they looking for something that ain't them.
I was living in Atlanta for a summer right after I took this course on how to do microanalysis of statistics of census data. And I kept hearing people talk about this ratio in Atlanta, and everybody was giving me a different number. So somebody, like a brother would say, man, brothers got it good in Atlanta. The ratio is like 12-1.
Yeah.
And then a woman will say, man, it's hard for sisters in Atlanta. The ratio is like 22-1. And it would be like this real precise type number, but it had so much variance. And so, I was thinking to myself, well, it's easy enough just to, check the census data on this, what is the Black male to female ratio in Atlanta? And, the first time I did it, I didn't put any qualifications on it. And it came out to be like kind of almost a perfect 1-to-1 match. And so.
Hold on. Atlanta is a 1-to-1?
Wait, but let me put the qualifications on it. That was just looking at all of them, right? So I said, okay, well, let me think through who's talking about this. So let me only look at Black people between the ages of 25 to 45 who are single. So take all the married people out, who are single. And I also put college educated in it because you
gotta have a nice card too. You gotta take the card thing in account in Atlanta.
I couldn't find that in the census.
That's not in the census.
I tried to find cards. I couldn't find in the census. I could do income though. Now when I put those qualifications in it, then it came out to be about 1.5 to 1.
Wow.
Yeah, 1.5 to 1.
Now, but that's still incredible.
Now, is that good? Like, I'm not gonna say that it's good because that means that if we're only looking at single Black people that want each other, and you got to make a lot of assumptions there that they want the opposite sex, they want marriage, all that kind of stuff. But if all that was true, 1.5 to 1 could mean you have 1.5 million Black women and only 1 million Black men. That still may not be an optimal situation for a sister, but it's not 22-1.
Yeah.
And that
like
puts
22-1 would look kind of almost impossible. That would mean that you would walk around Atlanta for months maybe and not see a Black man.
Because let me tell you something, all my friends that live in Atlanta that are either strippers or married are dating out the wazoo, okay? Mm-hmm. They are all dating. All my married friends are dating.
Yeah, I mean, and every time I'm in Atlanta, like, I mean, and like you said, you have to take into consideration who wants the opposite sex, different things like that. But, oftentimes, like, I see an abundance of, for me being a heterosexual, like, of what I perceive to be heterosexual men. So You know, and I think a lot of times we're so driven by that perspective, and then that perspective drives our decisions.
Right.
And our decisions
and our behavior.
in turn become something that could be much less than what we deserve, because we believe that what we deserve doesn't exist.
Yeah, and you got black men in Atlanta acting like straight whores. You know, straight F boys, because they think it's 22-1, and they think they gotta have their 22.
Lord, sometimes I like a good they just
why you had to get Sasha started? Why?
Dr. T, chime in, save me. Ali hoop me.
So what I was gonna say is, I think also, if you think about it, if a woman is approaching it with the perception and the perspective that all of these men have all these choices, then she also may devalue herself.
Yeah.
Right? So again, this starts to play into all of the way we think about ourselves, the way we approach the world, the way we interact with each other, and it's all based on bad statistics.
Based on BS.
Yes, all based on BS.
But Dr. Toldson, how do we also, like, I know when Star asked you and you were talking about some of the things we should be looking for when we're looking at data, what I'm also hearing is that sometimes we're not even being issued the right data.
Right.
So it's like, how did you go about truly debunking some of these myths, knowing that the government doesn't always even provide the right data?
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, most of the time the government provides the right data. It's just people take that data and do different things with it. You know, the data that that was used for there being more black men in prison than college, you know, it wasn't incorrect data per se. It was the way that people used it was incorrect. And you know, census data, you know, I mean, what I did with looking at those numbers in Atlanta, and you know, when I looked at educated black women and their probability, that's data that I got from the government. You know, the census data, American Community Survey, which they do every year, snapshot of Americans. So it's not that the data isn't there. It's just it's a little bit more complicated to get the truth, especially when it comes to black people. You know, there was a point when, based on statistics, white women was the fastest growing inmate population. Now, a lot of it had to do with a regression towards the mean. They had been so low for so long. And then once crystal meth started hitting these rural communities, you had, you know, this great percent increase in white women going to prison. Now, if that was black women, the narrative would have encompassed every black woman, regardless of, you know, background, where she's from, status, or anything like that. And there would have been this irresponsible narrative that came out. In fact, there has been some irresponsible narratives about black women in the criminal justice system and otherwise. But, and you can find articles on the increase in white women in the prison system that happened around the mid-2000s to, you know, 2015, but it was all contextual, very responsibly produced. It helped you to see the exact circumstances and conditions and locations and demographic factors, the intersectionality of these white women who are most vulnerable to going to prison. We don't show black people the same respect when it comes to any negative statistics that come out about us.
Change that though, because like I know the statistic you're talking about with white women in prison, and there was basically this charge of we must figure out what's going wrong with our white women, and we must understand how to resolve this problem. I sat in, this is like 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I sat in a meeting with I can't get the first name, but she former Representative Bono, Sonny Bono's widow, and I'm sorry to say this, but they have a child who had a issue with with drugs, a drug issue, right? And we all know the new narrative, like crack was, you're irresponsible, you're a terrible person. And now it's, oh no, you're on painkillers or some form of heroin or opioids. So now it's a disease and we must come to a solution. And when I brought up crack cocaine and that, hold up, you sentencing Black people to life in prison for, I mean, basically a personal use amount of drugs, like what, a couple of rocks, you know, a week, maybe 2-3 days worth of drugs. And y'all could be making meth in a trailer, a whole trailer full of meth, and be like, no, this is disease and a problem. And the room got ice cold. It was like, you know, so how do we change it? We know the problem. We know there's no, as you are eloquently articulated, there's no compassionate understanding and search for these underlying whys in the data. How do we change it? What do we need to be like banging on doors about?
You need to read No BS. That's how.
Ooh, where can I get that? Where can I get that? Is that on Amazon?
But you know, it's a serious question, and you know, the issue that you pointed out is a perfect example of how when a situation happens with white people, we treat it differently. And it's not that, you know, we want white people to start going to prison for 25 years to life. We just want Black people to be afforded the same types of accommodations when we need help. And I think it's important for Black people to lead the charge of changing the narrative, because, you know, I just don't think that white people are going to do it for us. I don't think that they're going to start treating us with more humanity based on statistics out of the goodness of their heart before we start insisting on it.
Can I say something though? Honestly, and a lot of them memes and stuff, like, and everybody weigh in on this. My observation over many years is that we believe the same thing white people believe about Black people. Like, when you get down to when you do the 5 whys and you probe somebody, the underlying condition, I won't say typical because I don't have stats and numbers, but what I found in my gut is that we really do believe what white people believe about us.
Well,
which is
you're right.
Yeah,
you're
we
right.
Had the same bad information.
Yeah. And you know, the subtitle of my book, you know, when I first used to say it, the original quote was, Black people need Black people who believe in Black people enough not to believe every bad thing they hear about Black people. That was the original quote. I just changed it to people for the purpose of the book. But you're right. And I mean, people like you sitting in that meeting, that should be the norm, not the exception. You know, I remember being in a meeting in Memphis, and, you know, I was brought in as an expert on looking at issues of race and equity in the schools. And so they had this information that they were sharing with everybody. And it was, you know, probably 50% Black people in the meeting. And, you know, they were talking about, and this is my first time seeing the information, but they were talking about the achievement gaps. And they were like, you know, black kids are doing this bad, and you know, 50% or 80% of our Black kids aren't even prepared after they finish kindergarten. Like, they were just spewing off all this stuff. And so I was looking at the data that they presented there, and I asked a very simple question, you know, and what I consider to be a reasonable question. And it seemed to stump everybody. And what I said was, the data that you're showing me shows there to be a larger achievement gap between Asian students and white students, larger than the gap that exists between Black students and white students. So I asked, I said, are you concerned about this large gap between white students and Asian students? And since it's so much larger than the gap between Black students and white students, should we be looking at the gap between Asian students and all students and finding corrections there? Everybody seems so confused, like I was talking a different language. But they're just not accustomed to looking at any issue. It's a normalization of whiteness.
Ooh, say it again, say it one more time. Say it again, say it again.
The normalization of whiteness.
Ooh.
So that means if you are a group that's outperforming white people, you're not a standard. You're just doing better than you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
let that breathe.
So then what, Dr. Toldson, so, you know, as we close out, like, what is your suggestion in when you're in those rooms and people are doing what we normally do every day, looking at those bad, the BS, the bad statistics? How have you been able to impart change, and how, you know, what do you recommend that we can do when we're sitting at certain tables to do the same?
Yeah, you got to believe in Black people. You know, it's, and you know, going back to that house analogy, if somebody gives you a low appraisal on a house that you love, you will challenge it. If someone gives you a low appraisal of Black people, you should challenge it. Nobody knows Black people better than us. You know, we've let people just slam single Black mothers. And, you know, single Black mothers have done so much for Black children. I mean, they've made a way out of no way. And we let people use statistics that know nothing about single Black mothers create a narrative. Some of us have been raised by single Black mothers and have seen them be defamed and have said nothing. We have to start speaking out. And a lot of it comes from people being intimidated, people feeling like if a scientist comes in or somebody who has these credentials and they start spewing off these statistics, that they can't, you know, they can't defend themselves. So, you know, Black people need to understand that your personal connection to the material, it does supersede someone looking from the outside with statistics. We have to let.
How do you know? Because like one of the things, like, how do you teach that? Like my experience of Blackness is very positive, but that's because of my family and my upbringing, right? But I went to a HBCU and I saw very, very wealthy Black people. I also saw Black kids that were like, you know what, I made it out. The made it out all did well, but our experiences of Blackness were very, very different. I'm middle class. I had a girlfriend that was from London. I had a girlfriend from Beverly Hills. I had a girlfriend from Compton. And we are, you know, so all of our experiences of Blackness were very different. Now we went to North Carolina A&T, so we were inundated with like, no, this is what Blackness is greatness. But for those that are not getting that type of like, almost like they reprogrammed us. Literally reprogrammed us was from like freshman week on, and it literally changed the trajectory of my life. Even though I came from a good Black family, it taught me, it took it to another level. So like maybe this is a Dr. T question, I don't know, but like because many Black people, their experience of Blackness is not necessarily positive, and I should say many. There are some, and that reverberates through their work and through, you know, how they and view Blackness in the world.
And we have to claim our agency when it comes to defining our experience. We have to define ourselves for ourselves. You know, one quick anecdote before we adjourn. When I was working with the Philadelphia's Juvenile Detention Center, I'm working with the people who are working with these juvenile inmates, and the vast majority of them Black, almost 100% Black. And I asked them, I said, describe the communities of most of the children who are in here. And I heard things like drug infested, crime ridden, family disunity. I asked them to describe the families. They said, you know, single parent households, broken homes, like all those types of things. And all I was asking for is a description. And all I heard was negative. So then my next question was, how many of you all grew up in neighborhoods that are similar to the children who are in this detention center? And a good half of them raised their hand. Most of them was from Philadelphia. You know, most of them had at least an associate's degree. And so about half of them raised their hand and said they came from similar neighborhoods. So then my next question was, how did you grow up in a neighborhood like this and end up with the job that you have, being a responsible citizen, being responsible to your community. That's when I heard things like, my mother, struggled, had multiple jobs, but she kept us off them streets. She knew that when the sun went down, you need to be in the house because there were things that she was trying to protect us from. Mm-hmm. They talked about the church. When all the other churches was moving out to the suburbs, this church stayed in the community. They opened up on the weekends. We could play basketball there. So that's when you start hearing all of these things. So my last question to them was, what do you think will enable you best to help these young men that's in the detention center? The first things you told me are the second things. And then they got it. So we need to not define our experiences based on somebody else's narrative.
That's
a good one. Dr. T, what's your thoughts? Psychologically, when we hear these things, it impacts us. I mean, we just tend not to believe in our community, not to believe in our brothers or our sisters, and not to even believe in ourselves. So, what's your thoughts on this?
So my final thought today is about pushing past our fear. So a lot of times, in the example that Star gave, for many of us, no matter where you came from, when you get to be that only Black person in the room or one of only a couple of Black people in the room, and you need to speak out, you need to give that thoughtful analysis, you need to help the room see something that they are missing, there's oftentimes a lot of fear because we're afraid we won't get invited back to the rooms. We're afraid that they will, misjudge what we're saying. And we go through all this dance in our head. And sometimes that prevents us from speaking our truth and speaking our experience, like Dr. Toldson just said. And so we have to be willing to push past our fear, because if we're in those rooms and we don't speak, then who do we expect to speak for us? Mm-hmm. Right? So we have a responsibility to ourselves, to our families, to our communities, to make use of the space we have. And if they don't invite us back, then we still needed to have said it that time because we won't be back. So right. We have to push past our fear and be willing to speak about the wide spectrum of Blackness, the wide spectrum of community, the wonderful things that we know to be true about being Black. And we just got to push past the fear, and we got to do it.
Yeah. That's a good one. Dr. Toldson, we're about to close out. Is there anything that you would just want to add to this conversation prior to, just anything else that you may feel like people should know?
I think that people need to stop denying the great things that does exist in the Black community. And, the example is, a lot of times people will say Black people don't have any community centers. We don't have enough community centers, but if you look hard enough in any major city, you'll see a Black person struggling to keep the doors open of a community center. We may say we don't have positive Black media. I didn't know about this show until you all invited me on here, but this is positive Black media. And so the problem isn't that we don't have certain things, is that it's not to the scale that it needs to be. And in order for it to get to the scale that it needs to be, we need to acknowledge its existence.
Star, what say you?
I got two things. Before I start, thank you. Thank you so much. You were an amazing guest, and you done armed us with some tools. So my first thing is, I go back to my mindfulness and yoga tradition in this conversation. And I end with first that, you will always be right. You will always affirm what you believe. And so I think the beauty of this conversation and the data from Dr. Toldson is that, we get to choose. And this is a weird, wild thing, but, in a metaphysical way, we get to choose what we believe. And so if you believe in Blackness, then you choose Blackness and you choose to affirm it. And that was from last week's show, right? So about affirming versus the fear. So I'm going to say first, you're always right. So decide what you're going to believe in. And so I'm deciding to believe in Blackness. you know, and I'm going to affirm Blackness in every space I walk into and speak on. And I know my sisters and the brother here, we're going to do the same, but I believe in Blackness. So choose what you believe in, because you're going to always make yourself right, period. And then the second thing is, you know, I think Dr. T, you talked eloquently and beautifully about fear, and about how fear has kept, in many ways, the ones of us that do make it in the room quiet in the spaces where we should be courageous and loud, you know, because we don't want to be disruptive. We want to make sure we get it re-invited. And I love that you said that, because my second thing is connect to the divinity, our ancestors, whatever you want to call it, connect to God, however you call it, whatever name you got for it, so that you can speak courageously. So you can speak and support that which you believe. And if you believe in Blackness, that means you can speak Blackness, you can speak Black truth and the beauty of Blackness in all spaces, not just, you know, on a podcast, but then I go to work and I affirm whiteness, you know. And I think we just got to learn how to be consistent and stop all this code switching. Again, I'm on my soapbox, you know. But so you're always going to be right. So choose what you believe in, to, you know, because you're going to make it right, period. And two, you know, connect to something higher than self, so that you can have that behind you and on you, so that you can speak courageously to what it is you say you believe.
Absolutely.
I think I would just close out saying I actually have two things today. One is that I want to make sure that I'm mindful in doing a better job than getting the sound bites that I oftentimes may regurgitate to others. I think, you know, at times when I'm even sharing information, or I'm even researching and looking at facts, I'm just looking at some basic numbers without maybe going deeper into those numbers. And oftentimes that can propel a perspective that isn't all the way true without just diving a little bit deeper into those numbers. And so, you know, Dr. Toldson, I definitely thank you for acknowledging, helping me to acknowledge that, hey, we got to go deeper than the first article that we read. We got to go deeper than the first number that we see, so that we can be better equipped to understand that there's more to it than what keeps being stated, which is the problem. That there's a lot of positive things that are happening. And I think the second thing is just, you know, I'll never forget, I was working for this big PR firm. I was their contracts supervisor. And for some reason, I was pulled into a meeting where they were getting ready to submit a proposal on rural and urban communities, and basically needing some sort of like maternal care. And I'll never forget, everybody in the room was white. And everybody in the room was sitting around trying to think of ideas on how to appease an urban community, and talking about their experience when they were pregnant. Meanwhile, a lot of them very wealthy, live in Alexandria, and saying things as though, well, I had access to care, and I had this, and I had that. And at the time, I was a single parent with a master's degree, a single parent who actually had doctoral credits. Like, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, I can't believe that these white women really believe these things. And I remember just speaking up and saying, like, that wasn't my experience. I didn't have those resources. I didn't have that opportunity. And I don't come from the most impoverished area that you can think of. And everybody, as you mentioned in something you said earlier, Dr. Toldson, was just, I mean, ice. You would have thought that I said something bad about white people. And it was uncomfortable. And I think, you know, to Star's point and to Dr. T's point of us being able to overcome our fear and our uncomfortability to be able to speak up and represent the Blackness that exists. And as you mentioned, Dr. Toldson, we got to first address the racism before we can address a lot of other things. So I just, you know, I piggyback on that sentiment of not being afraid to speak up and share our experience. So, you know, this has definitely been insightful. We thank you, and we out.